He signed the papers without looking at her once. That was the part Serena Ashcroft would remember long after everything else faded. Not the cold marble of the courthouse hallway, not the lawyer's careful voice reading the settlement terms, not even the fact that the settlement left her with virtually nothing. What she would remember was that Nolan Pierce, the man she had loved for 11 years, could not bring himself to look at her face while he ended her life. He was smiling at something his attorney said. A small smile, private, satisfied, the kind a man wears when a problem has finally been solved. Serena signed her name, picked up her suitcase, walked out. If you have ever poured everything you had into someone who turned out to be a stranger, you already know exactly how her legs felt on those courthouse steps, like walking on borrowed bones. Before we go further, if this kind of story speaks to you, hit that like button right now and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe if you haven't, because what's coming in the next parts will leave you breathless. Now let's go back to that courthouse, because something is about to happen on that sidewalk that will change absolutely everything. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of mid-November Thursday that Chicago produces like a warning. Serena stepped through the courthouse's glass doors onto the wet sidewalk and stopped for a moment, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she genuinely could not remember where she had intended to go. She had a suitcase. She had a phone with 43% battery. She had a bank account containing $1,100 and change, the remains of a private savings she had kept under her own name because some instinct, years ago, had told her to keep something that was only hers. She had a name, too. Ashcroft. She had not used it in 11 years. Behind her, through the glass, she could hear Nolan's laugh. He had a particular laugh for moments of victory, loose and generous, meant to be heard. She had always thought it was one of his better qualities, that laugh. It turned out it was just a sound he made when he got what he wanted. She started walking toward the parking structure where she'd left her car, a 2019 Honda Civic that was also technically no longer hers because it had been in Nolan's name, but his attorney had agreed she could keep it for 30 days until she found alternative transportation. 30 days. They had written it into the settlement with the same detached efficiency one might use when arranging the return of a leased appliance. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it. It buzzed again. Then again. Then it began ringing. A number she didn't recognize, foreign country code, and she almost let it go to voicemail. She pressed it to her ear instead because she was tired and not thinking clearly, and sometimes the smallest decisions are the ones that rearrange your entire life. Miss Ashcroft. The voice on the other end was male, low, professionally calm, in the way that only people accustomed to genuine emergencies ever learn to be calm. We're positioned at Harrington Private Terminal, 14 minutes from your current location. We've been instructed to wait, but I want you to know that we are ready whenever you are. Serena stopped walking. I think you have the wrong number, she said. A pause, brief and careful. You are Serena Elaine Ashcroft, daughter of Marcus Ashcroft. The terminal is on West Cargo Drive. The car is already dispatched. She stood on the sidewalk with her suitcase handle in her fist and the November air on her face and 11 years of a careful, ordinary life pressing against her chest like a hand. Don't send the car, she said, and hung up. She made it 4 more steps before the black SUV pulled smoothly to the curb beside her. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't cut her off or screech or do anything that would attract attention. It simply materialized, the way very expensive, very serious things tend to materialize. And the rear door opened from the inside, and the man sitting in the back seat looked at her through the open door with the patient expression of someone who had expected exactly this moment and had simply been waiting for the calendar to arrive at it. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, not large, but the kind of still that large men try to cultivate and rarely achieve. Dark hair, a few threads of silver at the temple. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Serena's car, and he was holding a folded newspaper in one hand with the relaxed grip of a man who did not need props, but occasionally used them to appear less alarming. Serena, he said. Not Miss Ashcroft, just her name, the way someone says the name of a person they have known about for a very long time. My name is Lucien Vescari. I made a promise to your father. I've been keeping it for 8 years. I'd like to explain what that means, if you'll give me 20 minutes. She looked at him. She looked at the car. She thought about the courthouse behind her and the laugh she could still hear in her memory and the 30-day grace period on a Honda Civic. I'll stand here, she said. You can talk from there. Something moved behind his eyes. Not offense, closer to recognition, like a man noting a quality he had been told to expect but hadn't quite believed until now. Your father came to me in the spring of 2015, Lucien said, without adjusting his posture, without raising his voice. He was already sick. He didn't tell many people. He came to me because we had a history, not a comfortable one, but an honest one. And he asked me to do something that I don't normally do. He paused. He asked me to watch over someone who didn't want to be watched over. Someone who had walked away from everything on purpose, because she deserved a life she had chosen herself. The wind moved between them. He told me about you, Lucien continued. He said you were the only thing in his life he had ever built that was genuinely good. And he was afraid that the things he had done, the enemies he had made, would eventually find their way to you regardless of how carefully you had hidden. Serena's jaw was tight. My father is dead. Yes. 3 years after that conversation. He died of a heart attack. A beat, very small. That's what the official record states. She felt the cold go through her differently then. Not weather, something else. What are you saying to me? I'm saying that your father did not die of natural causes, and that the people responsible for his death have been very interested in your location for the past 2 years, and that today's proceedings... He glanced, briefly and without drama, in the direction of the courthouse, removed the last layer of cover that was keeping them from moving. Serena stood very still. How long have you known where I was, she said. Since 3 weeks after you left Phoenix in 2013. 11 years. He had known where she was for 11 years. And you never... You wanted a normal life, Lucien said. Your father wanted you to have a normal life. My job was to make sure nothing interrupted it, not to interrupt it myself. He opened the newspaper and held it toward her. Not the front page, the business section, folded to a specific column. Your husband's company lost its primary institutional investor this morning, Kessler Brandt Group, 14% of Pierce Capital's operating leverage, gone before the market opened. Serena didn't take the paper. He's my ex-husband. As of 2 hours and 17 minutes ago, yes. Something in his voice, not warmth exactly, more like respect offered without performance. I had nothing to do with Kessler Brandt. I want you to know that. What's happening to Nolan Pierce right now is a consequence of what Nolan Pierce has been doing. I did not arrange it. I am telling you about it because you should understand the landscape you're re-entering, whether you choose to or not. She hadn't moved toward the car. She hadn't moved away from it either. You said 20 minutes, she said. I did. Where? There's a private room at the terminal. No one you don't approve will be present. She picked up her suitcase. Not because she trusted him. She was not someone who trusted quickly, and 8 years of marriage to a man who turned out to be a performance had not improved that tendency. She got into the car because she was cold, and because something in the specific quality of the information he had just delivered told her that he was not lying, and because her father's name in a stranger's mouth, spoken with that particular weight, had unlocked something in her chest that she had been keeping shut for a very long time. The door closed. The SUV moved. In the back seat, neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. He knew I was unhappy, Serena said finally. Not to Lucien specifically, just said it into the air of the car. My father. I called him once, about 4 years in, and I didn't say it directly, but he knew. He always knew things I didn't say. She paused. He didn't tell me to leave. No, Lucien said. He told me you needed to make that decision yourself, that if he pushed you, you'd dig in harder, because that's who you are. A pause. He said you were stubborn in the best possible way. Serena looked out the window. Her reflection looked back. A woman in her early 40s, tired around the eyes, wearing a gray coat that had seemed like a reasonable choice this morning, and now felt like a costume from another life. What did my father actually do? She said. Not the version I grew up believing. Lucien was quiet for a moment. That's a longer conversation. Is the short version that he ran an empire and I am connected to it whether I want to be or not. The short version, Lucien said, is that Marcus Ashcroft built something that has outlived him, and the people who want control of it have been waiting for the right moment, and your divorce this morning was the right moment. Because I was protected while I was married. Because you were invisible while you were unremarkable. A quiet wife with no connections. The moment you step out of that story, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The terminal came into view ahead, a clean, low building behind a secured gate, the kind of facility that doesn't advertise itself, that exists in the infrastructure of a city like a kept secret. A matte black aircraft sat on the tarmac beyond the fence, and even at this distance, in the gray November light, it had a presence that was almost physical. At the gate, 3 men in dark tactical clothing checked the driver's credentials with the precise, unhurried movements of people who did this 30 times a day. One of them caught Serena's eye through the window and gave a very small nod. Not submissive, not aggressive. Something in between. The nod of a professional acknowledging a principle. It startled her. She had spent 11 years being invisible. 11 years as Nolan Pierce's quiet wife, the one at parties who smiled at the right moments and stayed out of the financial conversations and was generally understood to be pleasant but not particularly consequential. She had been very good at it because she had needed it desperately, that invisibility, that ordinary life that asked nothing of her except to be warm and present and uncomplicated. The nod unsettled her in a specific way she hadn't expected. Not because it was threatening, because it felt familiar. The car stopped. Lucien got out first, came around, opened her door himself rather than waiting for the driver. It wasn't performed chivalry. It was something else, a kind of deliberate care, like someone who had been told a thing was fragile and had taken the instructions seriously. There is absolutely nothing you are required to do, he said as she stepped out, the tarmac solid under her shoes. I want to be clear about that. You are not obligated to your father's world. You are not obligated to me. You came because you wanted information, and I will give it to you honestly, and then you make whatever choice you want. And if I walk back out and get in my Honda Civic, then my people will follow you at a distance you won't notice, Lucien said simply. Because that's the promise I made to a man I respected, and I intend to keep it regardless of your preferences. But you won't be coerced. You won't be managed. You will simply be protected. Serena looked at him for a long moment. That's a very arrogant thing to say to someone. Yes, Lucien agreed without apology. Your father warned me you'd say something like that. She almost smiled. It surprised her, the almost smile, right? Ambushed her from somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the grief and the cold, specific humiliation of the morning. She pressed it back. 20 minutes, she said, and walked toward the terminal building. Behind her, on the other side of the city, Nolan Pierce was stepping out of the courthouse with his attorney and his mistress, Darla Venn, who was already talking about a celebratory lunch, already talking about the Aspen property. They could move on now that the encumbrance of the marriage was settled. And Nolan was half listening and half watching something on his phone. A news alert about Kessler Brandt pulling out of Pierce Capital, which was confusing and irritating but surely manageable, surely the kind of Tuesday morning turbulence that men like him navigated constantly. His phone buzzed with another alert, then another. Then his attorney's phone began ringing, and the attorney stopped walking and looked at his screen with an expression Nolan had never seen on the man's face in 9 years of professional relationship, and the expression was fear. Nolan, the attorney said, we need to go back inside. Darla said, what? Why? We have reservations at... Now, the attorney said. Both of you. Now. And somewhere across the city, in a private room at Harrington Terminal, Serena Ashcroft sat down across from Lucien Vescari and picked up the folder he set in front of her and read the first page and felt the floor of her ordinary life drop away beneath her feet. The name at the top of the first page was her father's. The name at the bottom was her own. Between them, in 47 pages of documented transactions, surveillance records, and encrypted ledger extracts, was the inheritance she had never wanted and could no longer pretend didn't exist. She turned to page 2. Outside on the tarmac, The matte black Gulf Stream waited with its engines cold and its stairs deployed, and two men stood at the base of those stairs with their hands clasped and their eyes forward, in the particular posture of people who were prepared to wait as long as necessary. Whatever Serena Ashcroft decided in the next 20 minutes, it would not be the end of anything. It would be the last ordinary moment before the rest of her life. She turned to page 3 and kept reading. The third page was a photograph. Serena had been holding herself together with the specific discipline of a woman who had learned, early and painfully, that falling apart in front of strangers was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had read through the first 2 pages with her face neutral and her breathing controlled and her hands flat on the table, the practiced stillness of someone who had survived 11 years of a marriage that required her to be unreadable. The photograph broke something loose. It was her father. Marcus Ashcroft, maybe 62, 63, taken from a distance with a long lens. He was standing outside a building she didn't recognize, somewhere urban, East Coast by the look of the architecture. And he was talking to a man whose face was partially obscured, turned slightly away from the camera. Her father's posture in the photograph was different from any posture she remembered him having. Not the confident, expansive man who had filled every room she'd known him in, smaller, compressed. The posture of a man who was afraid. The timestamp in the lower right corner read, March 14th, 2018. He died in September of that year. "Who is he talking to?" she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. Lucien leaned forward and touched the edge of the photograph without picking it up. "A man named Cortez Rael. He runs an organization called the Solace Group. Officially, it's an international logistics and private equity firm registered in the Cayman Islands." He paused. "Unofficially, it is the most sophisticated financial criminal network currently operating in the Western Hemisphere." Serena looked at her father's compressed shoulders in the photograph. "He owed them money." "No." Lucien's voice was careful. "He had something they wanted, something worth considerably more than money." She already knew what he was going to say. She had known, she realized, since she turned to this page, maybe since she got into the car, maybe since the phone rang with a foreign country code while she was walking across a wet sidewalk with her whole life in a single suitcase. Some part of her had been running the calculation in the background for the last 45 minutes and had already arrived at the answer. "The ledgers," she said. "Your father spent the last decade of his life systematically documenting the Solace Group's financial operations. Every shell company, every transit account, every political contact on their payroll." Lucien sat back. "He wasn't building a criminal empire, Serena. He was building a case. And when he understood that he wasn't going to live long enough to use it, he encrypted everything and divided the access keys. And gave them to me without telling me. He embedded them in the estate documents, distributed across 3 legal instruments you inherited when he died. Individually, each piece looks like standard estate paperwork. Together, they constitute the only complete key to the most damaging financial intelligence file compiled against the Solace Group in 30 years of federal investigation." Serena set the photograph down. She thought about the estate paperwork. She had gone through it in a grief-hollowed daze in the weeks after her father's death, signed what the lawyers told her to sign, filed what they told her to file, and then put all of it in a fireproof box in the back of the closet in the house that was now technically Nolan's. The house she had left this morning with a suitcase and $1,100. "The documents are still in the house," she said. "No." Lucien's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness shifted. "My people retrieved them 14 months ago, when the Solace Group's interest in your location began escalating. We replaced them with accurate copies via every page identical, every signature matched. The originals are secure." She stared at him. "You went into my home," she said. "I sent 2 people into your home on a Tuesday afternoon while you were at your teaching shift at the community center and your husband was at a client lunch. They were inside for 11 minutes. Nothing was disturbed." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you what happened because I said I would be honest with you, and I intend to follow through on that." Serena pushed back from the table and stood up. Not in panic, she moved deliberately, walked to the window, stood looking out at the tarmac and the gray sky and the black aircraft with its particular quiet authority. She needed 8 feet of distance between herself and that folder because the information inside it was rearranging things inside her chest, and she required a moment to let the rearrangement happen without an audience. Her father had been murdered. He had known he was going to be murdered, and instead of warning her, instead of pulling her back into his world or placing himself between her and the people who ultimately killed him, he had hidden the most dangerous thing he possessed inside the ordinary paperwork of her grief, and trusted that it would wait for her, trusted that she would eventually be ready. "He could have told me," she said to the window. "He thought he was protecting you." "He was wrong." "Yes," Lucian said. "He knew that was possible. He was not a perfect man." She turned around. "Are you?" "Substantially less so." Something in the way he said it, flat, factual, without the reflexive self-deprecation that men who want to seem humble use when they're actually performing, made her look at him differently for a moment. He was watching her with the same still attention he'd had since the car, and she understood suddenly that it wasn't calculation. He was paying attention the way people pay attention when they consider something genuinely important, not to manage it, but to understand it. "Tell me about the threat," she said, and sat back down. "Specifically, not the history. What's happening right now?" Lucien nodded. He opened the folder to a page near the back, a surveillance map with several locations marked. The Solis Group became aware, approximately 2 years ago, that the access keys to your father's ledgers were distributed through his estate. They've spent those 2 years attempting to quietly acquire the legal instruments without triggering attention. He pointed to one of the marked locations. 3 months ago, they changed strategy. They began concentrating interest on you personally rather than the documents. Our assessment is that they intend to compel access rather than acquire it. They want to use me to unlock the ledgers, and then eliminate the variable. She absorbed that. And my divorce this morning made you visible. Until today, you were Serena Pierce, a private citizen with no notable assets and no public connections. The name change alone is enough to surface you in searches they run regularly. He paused. You have perhaps 72 hours before they confirm your location independently. Serena looked at the surveillance map, at the marked locations, at the cold organizational logic of people who moved human beings around a map like coordinates to be solved. "What does getting on that plane actually mean?" she said. "It means you come to a facility where you're genuinely secure while we work through the legal transfer of the ledgers to federal authorities. It means the Solis Group loses its reason to come after you because the information is no longer exclusively in your control." He paused. "It means this ends rather than escalates." "How long?" "Weeks, not months." "And Nolan?" She said his name the way you say the name of something that has already happened to you, past tense in the present. "Does he know any of this?" "Nolan Pierce has no knowledge of the Solis Group or your father's ledgers or any of what I've told you today." Lucien's voice was careful and precise. "He is, however, in serious difficulty of his own making. The woman he has been involved with, Darla Venn, has been using financial instruments connected to Pierce Capital to process payments for a cartel-adjacent organization for approximately 3 years. The federal investigation that is about to surface was already underway before today." Serena sat very still. He didn't know. Almost certainly not. He was useful to her because he was credible and careless and too proud to look carefully at money that came in under favorable terms. Something moved in Lucien's voice. Not contempt, but a kind of tired accuracy. Men like Nolan Pierce are very easy to use because they assume the world is organized around their intelligence. It makes them careless. She thought about Nolan in the courthouse. The smile, the practiced laugh, the 11 years of small erosions that she had told herself were normal, that she had bent herself around because she had wanted so badly for the ordinary life to be real, for the choice she had made to mean something. She had loved him. She had genuinely loved him in the beginning before she understood what he was. That was the part she didn't talk about, not the cruelty, which had been gradual and deniable and almost elegant in its consistency, but the love that had existed before it, that she had given him something real and he had not known what to do with real things. She closed the folder. Tell your pilot to file the flight plan, she said. Lucian didn't react with relief or satisfaction. He simply reached into his jacket, removed a phone, and sent a single text with the unhurried motion of a man checking off a task he had expected to eventually complete. Serena picked up her suitcase. It was the same suitcase she'd carried out of the courthouse 2 hours ago. Same gray coat. Same $1,100 and 43% battery. 38% now. She looked exactly like the woman who had walked out of that building with nothing, because externally, nothing had changed. Internally, something that had been locked for 8 years had turned over. Not rage, not grief, something quieter and more dangerous than either. She walked toward the terminal door, toward the tarmac, toward the black aircraft with its stairs still deployed and its crew waiting with that specific professional patience. The wind came at her sideways, and she didn't break stride. Behind her, Lucien Vescari followed at a distance that felt deliberate, giving her the space to arrive at the plane on her own terms, under her own momentum. She put her foot on the first step. And somewhere across Chicago, in a glass-walled conference room on the 41st floor of his own building, Nolan Pierce sat across from 2 federal agents who had placed a document on the table in front of him, and the document had Darla Venn's name on it, and a number of other names, and at the bottom of the 3rd page, in a context he could not yet understand, the name Ashcroft appeared in a way that made the room feel suddenly much smaller. He looked up at the agents. "I need a lawyer," he said. One of the agents nodded. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "you're going to need several." The Gulf Stream leveled off at 39,000 feet, and Serena hadn't said a word in 40 minutes. She sat in the rear section of the cabin, separated from the forward seats by a partition that someone had tactfully closed. The leather was the color of charcoal. The lighting was low and amber. Outside the oval window, the cloud layer had closed below them so completely that Chicago might not exist anymore. Just white and gray and the hard blue of altitude, clean and indifferent. She had her father's folder open on the table in front of her. She wasn't reading it. She was looking at the photograph again. The one with the compressed shoulders and the unfamiliar posture and the timestamp that meant he had been standing in front of a man connected to his own death 6 months before it happened. She kept thinking about a phone call. Spring of 2018, she had called him on a Sunday. She called every 3rd Sunday, regular as a bill, because that was the rhythm they had established after she left, and it had held for years. He had sounded tired on that call, a specific kind of tired she hadn't been able to name at the time. She had asked him if he was all right. He had said, "You know me, Sari. I sleep like a rock and complain like a man who doesn't." He had made her laugh. He had asked about her teaching work, her students, whether she was eating enough, whether Nolan was treating her well. She had said yes. "Nolan is treating me well." She had believed it was mostly true. She closed the folder. The partition opened and Lucien came through carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her without asking and settled into the seat across the table. He had removed his jacket. His shirt was white, slightly rolled at the sleeves, and there was a scar along the inside of his left forearm. Old, faded to silver, not something he tried to conceal. He looked like a man who had stopped worrying some time ago about what his body told people about his history. "You should try to sleep," he said. "I'm not tired." "That's not what your face says." She looked at him. "Don't do that." "What?" "The thing where you think you know what I need." He picked up his coffee. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a moment, which was somehow less uncomfortable than it had any right to be. "Where are we going?" she said. "Coastal Maine, private property, secured perimeter, full communications capability. We'll have everything you need to work with legal counsel on the federal transfer." He paused. "There's a view of the water. I don't know if that matters to you." "It doesn't." "Okay." She turned the cup in her hands. The coffee was good. Not private jet performative good, but actually good. The kind that came from someone paying attention to small things. It annoyed her that she noticed. "Tell me about the Solis group," she said. "Not the organizational overview. Tell me what they actually do to people who have what I have." Lucien was quiet for a moment. The aircraft moved through a pocket of mild turbulence, and neither of them reacted. "They're methodical," he said. "They don't move fast, and they don't move visibly. The way they apply pressure is to dismantle the structure around a person first. Eliminate the supports, the relationships, the financial stability. By the time they make direct contact, the person is already isolated. He paused. It's effective. People who are alone make faster decisions. They orchestrated the divorce. We believe they influenced it. Darla Venn has a documented connection to a Solus-adjacent financial operator out of Miami. We don't know if she was placed deliberately or recruited after the fact. The distinction matters legally, but not practically. Serena thought about Darla. She had met her 6 times over the course of the marriage. 4 times at company functions, once at a charity event, once at a dinner where Serena had noticed the way Nolan laughed at Darla's jokes with the particular looseness he used to reserve for her. She had filed it. Not confronted it, filed it, because confrontation required energy and certainty, and she had been running low on both for years. She used him, Serena said. Thoroughly. He made it easy. He did. She appreciated that he didn't soften it. And now he's sitting in a federal interview. Almost certainly, yes. Does he know about me? About what I actually am? Lucien set down his cup. That's the question I've been trying to answer for several days. Our current assessment is no. Nolan Pierce genuinely believed you were exactly what you presented yourself as. A woman with a dead father, a modest inheritance, and no particular connections. Something shifted in his expression. Which means his cruelty toward you was entirely self-generated, not instruction, not strategy, just his own character. The words landed with a specific, blunt weight. She had known this, abstractly, for years. Hearing it stated plainly by someone with no emotional investment in softening it was different. Like the difference between knowing a room is cold and stepping into it. There's something else, Lucien said. His tone changed on those 3 words. Barely, but she caught it. She had developed, across 11 years of marriage to a man who lied in pleasant registers, a precise sensitivity to the specific frequency of information being withheld. Say it. The Solus Group's interest in the ledgers isn't only about self-preservation. Your father documented something that goes beyond their financial operations. He opened his own folder, slimmer with a different classification mark on the cover, and slid a single page across the table. 7 years ago, a federal task force operating out of the DOJ began building a RICO case against Solus. 14 months in, the investigation collapsed. 3 lead investigators were reassigned. 2 witnesses recanted. The assistant U.S. attorney on the case resigned and entered private practice. He let her read. Your father's ledgers contain documentation of who within the federal system Solus controls. Names, payment records, dates. Serena read the page. Then she read it again. This means we can't go to the standard federal channels, she said. Not directly. No. You have a contact. I have one person inside the DOJ I trust with specific knowledge about why I trust her. She's been building toward this case independently for 4 years. He paused. Her name is Agent Petra Soal. She is not aware of the full scope of what the ledgers contain, but she needs to be. And to bring her in, you need to show her enough to risk her career. Enough that she'll understand what's at stake. Serena looked out the window. The clouds had broken below them, and she could see the geometry of farmland, brown and gray-green, impossibly small. My father built the greatest weapon against these people and then died before he could fire it, she said. And then I spent 8 years teaching community college composition and not knowing any of this existed. Yes. And you spent 8 years watching from a distance. Yes. Following the instruction of a man who told you to let me be. Yes. His voice didn't waver. And I'm not going to apologize for that, because Marcus was right that you deserved the chance to live without any of this. He just didn't anticipate that they would find a way to end the choice for you. She turned from the window. What I can't work out, she said slowly, is why you. Why did my father go to you specifically? A pause. Not evasion, more like a man selecting the accurate version from several available versions. Your father and I were on opposing sides of a significant conflict for about 4 years in the late 90s. When it ended, we came to an arrangement. Over time, the arrangement became something more like respect. He looked at her steadily. He trusted me not because I was safe, but because he knew exactly what I was, and I had never pretended otherwise. What are you? Currently, the last person standing from a structure that no longer exists in the form it once did. A brief pause. I spent 20 years building something I believed in, and the last 5 watching it become something I didn't. I've been dismantling my own organization for 3 years, systematically and quietly. Serena stared at him. You're retiring. I prefer restructuring toward irrelevance. And this, she gestured at the aircraft, the security teams, the whole careful apparatus of the last several hours, is your last obligation. It's the one I intend to complete correctly. She sat back. She believed him. She didn't entirely understand why she believed him, and that uncertainty made her cautious, but the belief itself felt solid. He was exactly what he said he was. A precise, dangerous man keeping a promise he had made to someone he respected, and doing it without drama or expectation. It was, she thought, possibly the most honest relationship she had been inside in a decade. That thought was depressing enough that she let it pass quickly. The aircraft began a subtle shift in orientation. Not descent, a directional adjustment. She felt it in her inner ear. Across the cabin, something changed in the ambient sound of the engines. Lucian sat forward. He looked at his phone. His expression didn't do anything dramatic. It simply went very still in a way that was distinct from his normal stillness. This was the stillness of a man processing information that required immediate recalculation. What? Serena said. He didn't answer immediately. He was already typing. Lucien. He looked up. We have a communication from one of my contacts in Chicago. Federal agents executed a search warrant on Pierce Capital's offices 40 minutes ago. Standard procedure for the Darlaven investigation. Expected. He paused. What was not expected is that the search team found a secondary file, physical documents, not digital, in a locked cabinet in Nolan's private office. Another pause. The file contains correspondence between Nolan and a man named Gerald Spence. I don't know that name. Gerald Spence is a legal intermediary who has represented Solace Group interests in 3 previous transactions. Lucian set the phone face down on the table with a deliberateness that had its own weight. Serena, the correspondence goes back 4 years. It references, by description, the existence of encrypted financial documentation connected to the Ashcroft estate. The cabin was very quiet. Nolan knew, she said. The correspondence suggests he was aware that you had a connection to significant encrypted assets. It's not clear how much he understood about the specifics. Lucien's voice was measured. But someone told him enough to make him interesting to Spence. And Spence's involvement means Solace had a line to your household for at least 4 years. She felt the betrayal move through her, not as heat, but as cold, precise and penetrating, finding every place she had trusted and settling there. 4 years. Nolan had known, or suspected, or been told something for 4 years. Had he stayed in the marriage because of it? Had the cruelty been calculation after all, wearing her down toward compliance, toward a vulnerability that someone else could exploit? Or had he known and simply not understood what he knew, held information without grasping its weight, the way he held most things he couldn't immediately monetize? She didn't know which version was worse. I need to see the correspondence, she said. I'm getting a copy now. And I need to speak to Agent Sowal, today. That's going to require... I understand what it requires. Her voice was flat and clear. Set it up. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the phone and made a call, speaking quietly, and she turned back to the window and let the cold knowledge reorganize itself inside her into something she could work with. Below them, New England was emerging from the cloud cover. Dark forest, the first glimpses of coastline, the gray Atlantic spreading out toward a horizon that didn't end. It was beautiful in the way that useful things sometimes are. The facility in Maine was a compound built into a coastal hillside. Not ostentatious, nothing that announced itself, but constructed with the specific thoroughness of people who had thought carefully about every failure point. Stone and timber. Camera coverage that Serena could identify, and she suspected considerable more that she couldn't. 8 people on the grounds when they arrived, each of them moving with the economical purpose of professionals who had prepared for a specific situation. A woman named Rask met them at the vehicle entrance. Late 30s, short hair, wearing a fleece over tactical clothing with the ease of someone who slept in similar gear. She briefed Lucian in low, rapid sentences while walking, and Serena caught fragments: perimeter check, communications window, secondary team positioned. Rask glanced at Serena once, directly, with an appraising look that was professional rather than hostile, the look of someone adding a new variable to an existing equation. "Miss Ashcroft," she said, as if acknowledging a weather condition. "Rask," Serena said, because the woman's manner clearly called for last names. Something adjusted in Rask's expression. Minuscule. The recalibration of an initial assessment. She went back to briefing Lucian, and Serena went back to listening. Her room was on the second floor, clean, a window facing the water, which Lucian had mentioned and which she had said didn't matter, and which, when she stood at it 10 minutes later with a glass of water in her hand, did matter in the way that honest things matter when you've been surrounded by constructed things for too long. She stood there for 6 minutes. Then she sat at the desk and opened her laptop. They'd had it retrieved from the Civic before the car was returned, she didn't ask how, and pulled up the estate documents she had scanned and saved in a cloud drive 3 years after her father's death, because she had told herself she needed digital backups of everything, which was true, but was also because some part of her had not been able to let go of the paper entirely. She found the 3 instruments Lucian had described: a trust amendment, a power of attorney clause, a property registry filing from a county in upstate New York. She had signed all 3 in the numb weeks after the funeral. She had not read them carefully. She had trusted the lawyers, her father's lawyers, men in good suits with careful voices. She read them carefully now. It took her 2 hours, and by the end, her handwriting, she had been taking notes, had gotten smaller and more compressed, the way handwriting does when the mind is moving faster than the hand can track. Her father had been extraordinarily careful. The keys were distributed across the 3 documents in a way that required specific legal knowledge to identify, the kind of embedded structure that would look like standard estate language to anyone without the template to decode it. Even knowing they were there, it took her almost 40 minutes to locate the first one. Marcus Ashcroft had trusted that she would find them if she needed to. He had trusted that she was enough. She closed the laptop and put her face in her hands, not weeping. She wasn't going to weep, not yet, not until there was space for it. Just a moment of acknowledging the weight of being someone's best hope when you didn't know you'd been designated. A knock at the door. "Come in," she said, and her voice was steady. Rask opened the door. Her expression had the tight, controlled quality of someone managing news that required controlled delivery. "Lucian needs you downstairs. Now." A beat. "We've lost contact with the Chicago contact who sent the Nolan Pierce correspondence." Serena stood up. "Lost contact how?" Rask's jaw shifted. "The kind of lost contact where we don't expect to reestablish it." The cold settled deeper. "And the correspondence," Serena said, "did it transmit before partial? We got 60% of the file. The rest is gone." 60%. Which meant they had something, but not everything. Which meant they were making decisions in the dark about the 40% they didn't have. And Solis already knew they'd been moving. She picked up her jacket. She walked out the door ahead of Rask, down the hallway, down the stairs, toward the sound of Lucian's voice on a call that had the particular clipped urgency of a man revising a plan in real time. Whatever controlled, careful timeline they had been operating on for the last several hours had just contracted to something much smaller. She could feel it in the air of the stairwell, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm arrives. They were no longer waiting for the Solis group to find her. The Solis group had already begun to move. The operations room was on the ground floor, behind a door that looked like a utility closet, and opened into something else entirely. Serena stepped through and understood immediately that the pastoral exterior of the compound was a deliberate misrepresentation. The room held 6 monitors, an encrypted communications array, 2 workstations, and 3 people who had clearly been awake through the night before she ever arrived. Maps, satellite imagery, a live feed from what appeared to be a traffic camera somewhere in the Chicago Loop. Lucian was standing at the center workstation with a phone pressed to his ear and his free hand flat on the table, fingers spread, the posture of a man using physical contact with a surface to stay calibrated. He was speaking in short sentences. He looked up when Serena entered, held her gaze for 2 seconds, and went back to the call. Rask moved to the nearest workstation and pulled up the partial file transfer. 60% of the correspondence between Nolan and Gerald Spence, rendered in scanned document images. She angled the monitor towards Serena without being asked. Serena sat down and started reading. The correspondence was not what she expected. She had been bracing for explicit conspiracy, clear directives, specific instructions, the kind of clean, damning language that people imagine criminal arrangements use. What she found instead was murkier, and in some ways worse. 4 years of emails and physical letters that moved in the elliptical, carefully deniable language of men who understood they might someday be read. References to an asset rather than a person, references to documentation rather than ledgers, references to a resolution that would benefit all parties. The language of people who wanted things without being willing to write down that they wanted them. But the shape of it was clear enough. Nolan had been told that his wife had a connection to significant financial documentation. He had been told that facilitating access to that documentation, or to Serena herself, would result in substantial benefit. He had been told this in 4 installments over 4 years, each letter more specific than the last, each one building the architecture of a deal that Nolan had neither accepted nor refused but had continued corresponding about. The last letter in the partial file was dated 7 months ago. In it, Gerald Spence wrote, "The timeline is now contingent on the dissolution of the domestic arrangement. Once that variable is cleared, our principals are prepared to move quickly. We trust you understand the value of your position in this." Serena read that sentence 3 times. The dissolution of the domestic arrangement. Their divorce. Nolan had not simply been careless. He had not simply been used. He had been in active correspondence with a man representing the organization that had killed her father, and he had continued that correspondence across 4 years and had never once, not once, told her. She did not feel what she expected to feel. She expected rage, the hot, consuming kind she had suppressed across 11 years of small humiliations. What she felt instead was a cold settling, like a body of water finding its level. Something clarifying. She closed the file. Lucien ended his call. He set the phone on the table and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything because the situation had passed the point where preliminary language was useful. "He knew," she said. "He knew something. The correspondence suggests he understood you had value beyond what you presented. Whether he understood the full scope, it doesn't matter what he understood about the scope." Her voice was even, each word placed. "He corresponded with the people who killed my father for 4 years, while sleeping next to me," she paused, "while asking me to pass the coffee." The room was quiet except for the low electronic hum of the equipment. "The contact in Chicago," Serena said. "Who was he, ma'am?" Lucien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "A man named Thomas Veer. He had been in my network for 6 years, solid, careful, experienced." "How did they find him?" "That's what I'm trying to determine." He looked at Rask. "Pull the transmission log. I want to know the exact timestamp on every packet that came through before the line dropped." Rask was already moving. Her fingers on the keyboard had the fluid, practiced speed of someone who had done this particular kind of forensic work many times. "Transmission initiated at 1422, she said. "Signal degradation starting at 1431. Full drop at 1433. 11 minutes of transfer." "What's in the missing 40%, Serena said. "We don't know." "Best guess?" Lucien looked at the monitor rather than at her. "The final letters in the sequence, the ones closest to the divorce date, the ones most likely to be explicit about what Nolan agreed to provide and when. So we have evidence of a conversation, but not the conclusion." "Correct." "Which means, in a federal proceeding, it establishes a pattern. It may not establish a completed agreement." He turned back to her. "It is still significant. It is not airtight." Serena pushed back from the workstation. She stood up and walked to the far wall, where a topographic map of the coastal region was pinned. The compound's position, access roads, 2 points marked in red that she assumed were observation posts. She stood looking at it with her back to the room. "Someone told them about Tomas," she said. "Yes." Someone who knew we'd be using him to root the file. Yes. Which means someone knew our operational plan. She turned around. Lucien, how many people knew you were activating Tomas today? The room shifted. Not physically. Something in the air changed. The particular atmospheric change that happens when a question lands in a room and everyone in it understands simultaneously that the question has a bad answer. Lucien said nothing for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was a long time. 4 people, he said. Myself, Rask, my communications coordinator in Boston, and he stopped. Serena watched his face. She had become, across 11 years of marriage to a man who performed emotions, extremely accurate at reading the faces of people who were trying not to show something. She watched Lucien's face move through a sequence. Not panic, not guilt, something more precise than either. The expression of a man who has just located an error he should have found earlier and is calculating its full cost in real time. And who? She said. A man named Cordell. He said the name carefully. My logistics coordinator. He's been with me for 11 years. Where is he now? Lucien picked up the phone. He dialed. He waited. The call went to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. He set the phone down on the table with a gentleness that was somehow more alarming than if he had thrown it. Rask, he said. Find Cordell. Rask's hands were already moving. 30 seconds of keystrokes. 40. She pulled up a tracking interface and entered a code and looked at the result, and the back of her neck did something that Serena could read from across the room. His locator went offline 4 hours ago, Rask said. He was in Providence. That's 3 hours from here, Lucien said. Yes. The silence that followed was not the silence of people processing. It was the silence of people who have processed and arrived at a conclusion they don't want to say aloud, because saying it aloud makes it irrevocable. Serena said it aloud. He sold us, she said. Or he was already theirs, one or the other, but the result is the same. Solis knows we're here. Lucien's expression had done something she hadn't seen from it yet. It had closed. The professional openness, the careful transparency he had been offering her all day, had pulled back behind something harder. He looked, for the first time, like what the intelligence files presumably said he was. Rask, he said. Full evacuation protocol, 20 minutes. Already moving, she said, and she was out of the room before the sentence ended. Lucien looked at Serena. There's a secondary facility, Vermont, smaller, less infrastructure. But the location is known to exactly 2 people, neither of whom is Cordell. And if one of those 2 people is also compromised, then we have a different problem. How long do we have? If Cordell confirmed our location 4 hours ago, Solis has had 4 hours to position people. The drive from Boston is 90 minutes. From New York, 4 hours. They would not send anyone who couldn't reach us before we moved. He was already moving toward the door, which means they're already in the area, which means 20 minutes is optimistic. Serena followed him out of the operations room and up the stairs at a pace that was just below running, the pace of people who are moving as fast as they can while still thinking clearly. She went to her room, picked up her laptop and her jacket, and looked once at the window and the water below it, and the water was very still and very gray, and the horizon was completely clean, and she thought, my father looked at water like this. She thought it in the half-second between picking up her bag and walking out the door, and then she was in the hallway and moving. The compound had changed. The 8 people on the grounds had doubled to at least 16, and they were moving with the controlled urgency of a reorganization that had been drilled. 2 vehicles at the rear of the property were already running. A woman Serena didn't recognize was carrying a hard case toward one of them with the focused expression of someone transporting something breakable and important. Lucien appeared at her shoulder. Stay close. Don't get into any vehicle I don't specifically direct you to. I wasn't planning to wander, she said. People make surprising decisions under pressure. It's not a criticism. They were halfway across the main room when Rask came in through the front entrance moving fast. Her hand was already raised in the gesture that means stop before any words came out. We have a vehicle on the North Access Road, she said. Not ours. Civilian plate registered to a rental company in Portland. It stopped 200 meters from the perimeter gate and hasn't moved in 6 minutes. 1 vehicle, Lucian said. One visible vehicle. Nobody said anything about what that distinction meant. They didn't need to. Is the southern route clear? Lucien said. As of 3 minutes ago. Then we go south. Now. He turned to Serena. With me. They went through the rear of the compound toward the running vehicles, and Serena noticed that the people around her had changed their physical configuration. The casual professional spacing of earlier had compressed, and she was at the center of that compression, and the people around her were positioned with the specific deliberateness of a protective detail that has moved from standby to active. She had never been protected before. She found it simultaneously reassuring and suffocating, which she suspected was how protection always felt to people who had spent their lives being self-sufficient. They were 10 feet from the lead vehicle when the sound started. Not an explosion, not gunfire. A sound she needed a moment to identify because she had only ever heard it in films. The distinctive mechanical percussion of a helicopter, close and descending, coming from the north and moving fast. Rask said something sharp and technical into her earpiece. 2 of the security team moved to flank the vehicles. 2 more went in the opposite direction, back toward the compound, and Serena noticed they were carrying weapons that had not been visible 60 seconds ago. The helicopter came over the tree line to the north. It was black, no visible markings, and it was not a police or emergency configuration. It dropped altitude aggressively and swung toward the southern end of the property, and Lucien grabbed Serena's arm, not hard but decisive, and pulled her back toward the compound entrance. South route is compromised, Rask said. She was not shouting, but her voice had the stripped-down quality of someone who has eliminated every syllable that isn't essential. They had a second element we didn't see. The vehicle on the north road was a decoy. They drove us south, Lucian said, into the helicopter's coverage. Yes. Serena looked at the aircraft as it completed its arc and held a hovering position 200 meters off the southern perimeter. Watching, not engaging. Watching. They're not here to extract by force, she said. Everyone looked at her. If they wanted to hit the compound, they'd be hitting it. That's a surveillance and containment position. They're watching the exits. She looked at Lucian. They want me to move. They want me to run toward something they control. Lucien held her gaze for a long moment. She's right, Rask said quietly. I know she's right, Lucian said. He let go of Serena's arm. His hand came up and covered the lower half of his face for exactly 3 seconds. The gesture of a man running through options and finding them reduced. Then his hand came down and his expression had made a decision. We go back inside. We fortify and we communicate. If they breach, we deal with it then. We do not run into a pattern they've already set. Back inside the compound, back through the main room and into a central corridor, the team reorganizing around them with an efficiency that was almost graceful under the circumstances. And then Serena's laptop, tucked under her arm, started making a sound it had never made before. Not a notification sound. Something else. A tone she didn't recognize, low and repeating, coming from an application she did not remember installing. She pulled it out and looked at the screen, and the screen had a single window open that she had not opened, running an interface she had never seen, and in the center of the interface was a text field with a message that had apparently been waiting for her to look at it. The message read, Serena, don't trust Vescari. Check the main property deed. Your father owned this land. Lucian never told you that. Ask him why. She stopped walking. The person behind her, one of the security team, almost ran into her and adjusted with a quick step sideways. She read the message again. Then she looked up at Lucian, who was 4 feet ahead of her, talking to Rask, and she felt something move through her chest that was familiar from 11 years of marriage, but that she had hoped, in the last several hours, she had left behind. The specific physical sensation of not knowing if the person in front of you is what they say they are. Lucien, she said. He turned. She held up the laptop. He looked at the screen, and she watched his face with every calibrated instinct she had, looking for the tell. The micro-expression of a man confronted with something he'd rather she hadn't found. What she saw was not guilt. What she saw was something almost worse. Recognition. Who sent this? She said. I don't know. Does my father own this property? A breath. One beat of quiet. Owned, Past tense. Yes. He transferred it to a shell entity in 2016 to protect it from potential asset seizure. I administrate that entity. And you didn't tell me. I was going to tell you. When? When you had enough information to understand why it was a protection and not a... He stopped. Not a trap, she said. The words sat between them in the corridor, and everyone in the room was very still, and the sound of the helicopter outside was still audible through the walls, a low thrum that had the quality of a ticking clock. Is it a trap? She said. No. His voice was direct, unhedged. Then what is it that I don't have enough information to understand yet? He looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man deciding how far ahead to move a timeline that had already been compressed from weeks to hours to minutes. Your father didn't just give me the task of protecting you, Lucian said. He gave me the task of returning something to you, something beyond the ledgers. He paused. He built a parallel financial structure under your name, a legitimate one. International, diversified, and worth considerably more than the Solus Group's total liquid assets. He held her gaze without flinching. Which is why they don't just want the ledgers, Serena. They want to eliminate you because as long as you're alive and have access to what Marcus built, you are the single entity on Earth with enough financial leverage to dismantle them from the outside without a single criminal charge. The corridor was absolutely silent. You are not just an heiress, Lucian said. You are the instrument your father spent the last decade of his life building specifically to outlast him. Outside, the helicopter shifted position. Its sound moved, the Doppler change of an aircraft adjusting course. Rask appeared at the end of the corridor. Her face had the controlled urgency of someone managing a situation that had just added a variable. We have a breach, she said. East perimeter. 3 people, armed, through the fence. They're not coming in hot. They're moving tactically, controlled. They're not here to destroy the compound. She looked at Serena with an expression that required no translation. They're here to collect. Serena looked at the laptop in her hand. She looked at Lucien. She looked at Rask. She thought about her father at 62 years old with the compressed posture of a frightened man, standing outside a building in a photograph with a timestamp from 6 months before his death, already knowing what was coming, already having built the thing he intended to leave behind. He had trusted her to be enough. She set the laptop down on the corridor table. Show me every exit in this building, she said, and her voice had changed. Something in the register that she hadn't heard from herself in 11 years. Something from before the quiet wife and the community college and the 30-day grace period on a Honda Civic. Something that sounded, she thought distantly, like her father. Every exit, every weakness, and every asset we have left. Right now. Because we are not waiting to be collected, and we are not running into their pattern, and we are not fortifying in a building they already know the layout of. She looked at Lucien, and her eyes were steady and clear and cold. We move on our terms. Tell me what we have, and I'll tell you what we do with it. Lucien looked at her for one moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something that might have been relief or recognition or both. Then he turned to Rask. Brief her, he said. Everything. Rask laid it out in 4 minutes flat. The compound had 3 viable exits beyond the main vehicle routes. A maintenance tunnel running 60 meters from the northeast corner of the building to a storm drainage structure at the tree line, a roof access point with a ladder drop to the rocky slope on the west side, and a basement-level door that opened to a creek bed cutting south toward the highway. The tunnel was the longest route, but the only one with overhead cover for its entire length. The roof was fast but exposed. The creek bed was compromised. Rask's best assessment was that the 3-person breach team on the east perimeter was moving to cut off the southern approaches, which included the creek. That left the tunnel. It also left a problem. The tunnel exits at the drainage structure, Rask said, her finger moving across the site map on the workstation screen. From the structure to the tree line is 30 meters of open ground. No cover. If they have eyes on the north side, they do, one of the other operators said from across the room. His name was Fell, former military by his posture and the economy of his movements, and he'd been running the external camera feeds for the last 7 minutes. I've got a static position in the tree line north-northwest. Single observer, equipped with optics. He's been there since before we made the breach on the east side. They anticipated the tunnel, Serena said. They know the compound, Lucian said. There was no heat in it, just the flat acknowledgement of a man who has already moved past the stage where anger is useful. Cordell was here twice in the last 18 months for infrastructure review. He would have walked every exit. Rask looked at the map. So we have a compromised south, a covered north exit with a static observer, and a roof drop that puts us on a slope with no vehicle access. How far to the road from the roof drop? Serena asked. 400 meters through scrub and rock. In the dark. It's not dark yet. We have maybe 40 minutes of usable light. Serena looked at the map. She had never planned a tactical extraction in her life. She had taught freshman composition and graded papers on the passive voice and parallel structure. And she was standing in a compromised compound in coastal Maine, looking at an egress map with a trained security team, and the specific, cold clarity that had taken up residence in her chest sometime in the last hour was the only thing keeping the absurdity of that from capsizing her. We don't use any of them, she said. Everyone looked at her. We don't exit. We transmit. She looked at Lucien. You said Agent Soal has been building toward this case independently for 4 years. How fast can she move if we give her enough? She's federal. She can if the evidence is sufficient for an emergency warrant. The partial Nolan correspondence, the ledger key extracts I found in the estate documents, and whatever intelligence you have on the Solus Group's current operational presence in New England, including a documented armed incursion on private property right now. She held his gaze. You said she was the one person you trusted. How fast? Lucian looked at her for 2 seconds. Fell, he said. Get me a clean line to Boston. The next 12 minutes were controlled chaos of the specific kind that looks, from the outside, like calm. Lucy? Cien was on a secured satellite connection in the operations room, voice low and rapid. Rask redistributed the team. 4 people to internal defensive positions covering the main entry points, 2 watching the tunnel entrance from inside, 2 on the cameras. Serena sat at the secondary workstation and worked through the estate documents with a focus that required her to wall off everything except the problem immediately in front of her, which was locating and transcribing the embedded key sequences her father had hidden across 3 legal instruments before she had understood what they were. Her hands were not shaking. She was mildly surprised by that. The first key sequence took her 9 minutes to extract and transcribe. Her father had encoded it inside a property description clause, the relevant characters at specific intervals in the legal text, and finding the pattern required her to reconstruct the template logic she had worked out upstairs 2 hours ago from memory, because her notes were on paper and the paper was in her room, and she wasn't going to waste time going back for it. She got it on the first reconstruction. Her father had known what kind of mind he was leaving this for. She started on the second sequence. From the hallway, she heard Rask's voice, sharp, one-word commands. And then the sound of movement, boots on the floor, fast but controlled. She didn't look up. Whatever was happening, Rask was handling it, and the moment Serena looked up from the document she was working on, she would lose her position in the sequence, and the second key was more complex than the first, nested inside a trust amendments boilerplate with the elegance of a man who had been extraordinarily careful and extraordinarily afraid. East Perimeter Breach Team has entered the building, Fell said from across the room. His voice was the voice of a man reading a weather report. Ground floor, northeast corner. They're moving slow. Clearing rooms. How long to reach us? Serena said, still looking at the screen. At that pace, 6 minutes. She kept working. Lucian came back into the room. He looked at Fell, then at Serena, then at the document on her screen. He moved to stand beside her without touching anything, reading over her shoulder, and she felt his stillness beside her as something almost structural, like a wall between her and the noise of the situation. Sol needs 12 minutes to initiate the warrant process, he said quietly. She needs the ledger key to establish the evidentiary value. What she has from us now is strong, but not sufficient. I need 4 more minutes on this sequence. Fell says we have 6. Then I have 4. She didn't look up. Talk to me. Tell me something. Anything. It helps me work. A brief pause. She hadn't planned to say that. She hadn't known it was true until she said it. Your father used to do the same thing, Lucien said. He'd ask me to talk while he worked through something complicated. He said silence let the anxiety in. What would you talk about? He liked to hear about places. Described a city he hadn't been to. He wanted the texture of things. Another brief pause. I told him about Lisbon once, the specific way the light hits the water in the late afternoon. He made me describe it for 40 minutes while he went through a financial reconstruction that would have taken most people 3 days. Serena's fingers stopped for exactly 1 second. Then they resumed. He never went to Lisbon, she said. I know. He said there were too many places he hadn't been to yet. He always said yet. She found the second key sequence. She transcribed it in 90 seconds, checked it twice, and exported both sequences with the estate document scans into a single encrypted package. She looked at the package size, looked at the satellite connection quality on the secondary monitor. Lucien, transmission time on a package this size. He looked. 90 seconds on the current signal. Send it. He reached past her and initiated the transfer to Sowal's secure receiving address. The progress bar began its movement across the screen with the particular slowness that progress bars always achieve when the stakes are at their highest. From the northeast corner of the building, they heard a door open. Not an explosion, not a crash. A door opening carefully, the sound of a handle depressed and released with deliberate control. The sound of people who were trained and patient and not in a hurry because they believed they had already won. Rask appeared in the operations room doorway. She had a weapon in her hand, held low. They've cleared to the main corridor, she said. I have 2 of ours in contact position, but I'm not starting a firefight inside this building unless there's no other option. How many of them? Lucien said. 3 in the building. Unknown number still outside. She looked at the transmission progress. 40%. How long? 50 seconds, Serena said. The sound of movement in the corridor. Closer now. The systematic sound of professionals working through a structure. Checking doors, clearing angles, moving with the unhurried confidence of people executing a plan that had been rehearsed. Fell stood up from his station. He didn't say anything. He moved to a position near the operations room door, and Serena understood without being told that he was placing himself between that door and whoever was in the hallway. 60%. Serena kept her eyes on the screen. Her heartbeat was in her ears. Not racing, a hard, steady rhythm, each beat distinct, like something being nailed down. A voice from the corridor, male, clear, professionally modulated. Mr. Viscari, my name is Harlan Price. I represent interests you're familiar with. No one here needs to be hurt. We're looking for a conversation with the Ashcroft woman. That's all. Nobody in the operations room responded. We know she's on site, Price continued. We know about the transmission. We have people at the receiving end of your signal. A pause, calculated for weight. Whatever you're sending, it's not arriving. Lucien looked at Serena. She looked at the progress bar. 78%. He's lying, she said. You don't know that. He said conversation. Nobody sends a 3-element tactical team through a fence line for a conversation. She kept her eyes on the screen. He needs me functional and cooperative, which means he can't breach this room hard without risking that I become neither. 89%. From the corridor, the sound of footsteps stopping directly outside the operations room door. A knock. 2 knocks. Deliberate, almost courteous. Then Price's voice again, directly outside now, very close. Miss Ashcroft, I'd like you to hear something before you make a decision you can't reverse. 94%. The door handle moved. Fell put his hand flat against the door. Not dramatically. Simply placed his palm on the surface with the matter-of-fact solidity of a man exercising the one option currently available to him. Last thing your father said to me, Price said through the door, and his voice had changed. Dropped the professional register, found something that sounded almost personal, was that you were the only thing he'd built that was genuinely good. He said it to us, right before the end. I thought you'd want to know how it actually happened. The room went cold. Serena's jaw tightened so hard she felt it in her temples. 98%. He begged, Price said, for you. Not for himself, for you. He gave us 3 separate financial concessions trying to buy your safety. The voice was perfectly controlled and absolutely deliberate. And we took the concessions and killed him anyway, because that's what people like your father never understand. That sentiment is a currency that only works in one direction. 100%. Transmission complete. Serena exhaled through her nose. She stood up from the workstation. She straightened her jacket. She looked at Lucien, and something in her expression made him step back half a step without apparently deciding to. "Open the door," she said. "Serena, open it." Fel looked at Lucien. Lucien gave a single nod. Fel stepped back and the door swung open, and Harlan Price was standing in the corridor with two people behind him. A man and a woman, both armed, both with the flat professional readiness of people who do not hesitate as a trained behavior. Price was in his 50s, silver-haired, well-dressed in the specific way of men who want to project control through the quality of their clothing. He was not large. He had the compact, unhurried presence of a man who was accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his arrival. He looked at Serena. She looked back at him without any of the things he was presumably expecting. No fear, no calculation, no attempt to negotiate. She looked at him the way her father had once told her to look at difficult things, directly, without flinching, until they showed you what they actually were. "The transmission went through," she said. "Whatever you think you have at the receiving end, it wasn't enough to stop it. Agent Sowal has the ledger keys and the estate documentation and the partial correspondence linking Gerald Spence to my ex-husband's household for 4 years." She paused. "And she has the current location of an active Solus Group operation on U.S. soil, which means the next people through a fence line here won't be yours." Price's expression did not change. That was interesting. A man who had expected this and had something else. "Miss Ashcroft," he said, "I don't think you understand the scope of what we have inside the federal system. Agent Sowal is going to be very difficult to disappear, given that Lucien sent her name, position, and the context of her involvement to 4 separate journalists simultaneously with the evidence package," Serena said. That one landed. Small, a tightening at the corner of his eye, a millisecond recalibration. But she saw it. She looked at Lucy, and he gave her nothing in return, which was itself the answer. They had not sent anything to journalists. But Price did not know that, and now he had to calculate whether it was true. And calculation took time, and time was the only thing she needed. "I want to know one thing," she said, looking back at Price. "My father. The heart attack story. How long did you think it would hold?" Price looked at her for a moment. The look of a man deciding whether the answer cost him anything. He had apparently decided this conversation had moved into territory where the original plan required revision because what came next was not aggression. "Long enough," he said. 8 years, she said. It held 8 years. He was that careful. "You understand that. What it takes to be that careful for that long." She held his gaze. "He beat you. He just didn't live to see it." Something moved behind Price's eyes. Not sentiment. Something more like professional acknowledgement. The grudging recognition one adversary extends to another. Then his hand moved toward his jacket, and Fell moved and Rask moved, and the operations room compressed into the specific violent geometry of people in close quarters making instantaneous decisions, and Serena did not move back. She stood exactly where she was, because moving back would cede ground, and she was done ceding ground. And the sound that came next was not a gunshot. It was Price's phone. He stopped. His hand came out of his jacket with the phone instead of what everyone in the room had prepared for. He looked at the screen. His face went through something that Serena watched with complete attention. Whatever was on that screen had not been in his plan. He looked up at her. For the first time since the door had opened, his eyes had something in them that was not control. "That's federal vehicles on the North Access Road," Lucien said quietly, looking at Fell, who was looking at his own screen. 4 vehicles, moving fast. Price looked at Serena. "How?" he said. It came out stripped of everything except the genuine question. A man who had believed in the integrity of his own system encountering evidence of its failure. "Sowal had assets already positioned in the region," Lucien said. "She's been running a parallel operation for 4 months. We didn't know until she told us 20 minutes ago." He paused. Apparently she's been watching the same people we've been watching. She just needed the keys to complete what she already had. The corridor behind Price's two-person team was no longer empty. Two of Lucien's people had materialized from the adjacent rooms, positioned with the patient finality of a closing parenthesis. Price looked at his phone again. At the screen. At the road. He looked at Serena with an expression that was, she thought, as close to honest as a man like him was capable of in a situation like this. Your father built this specifically to outlast him, Price said. Not to anyone in particular, more like a man reading a sentence aloud that he had just understood for the first time. Every piece, the ledgers, the financial structure, the contacts, he built it so it could run without him. He built it so I could run it, Serena said. Outside, the sound of vehicles on gravel. Close. The specific quality of engines that had been running hard and were now slowing with purpose. Price's two-person team looked at each other with the particular look of people who have been doing this long enough to know when a situation has reached its conclusion. Price put his phone in his pocket. He straightened his jacket, the involuntary tidying gesture of a man preparing to be seen in conditions he had not chosen. He looked at Serena one last time, and the look had something in it that was almost, not respect, that was too clean a word, almost the acknowledgement of a debt. The acknowledgement that she was owed something by the sequence of events that had led to this corridor, and that the debt was now in the process of being paid. Your father, he said, was the most dangerous man I ever underestimated. I know, Serena said. He was mine too. The front door of the compound opened, and the corridor filled with the particular organized sound of federal agents entering a structure they have a warrant for, and Harlan Price put his hands where they could be seen, with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who has run out of moves but intends to retain, at minimum, the dignity of surrendering on his own terms. Serena stepped back into the operations room. Her legs, she discovered, were not entirely steady. She sat down in the chair in front of the workstation, not gracefully, just sat, the way a person sits when the structure that has been holding them upright for the last several hours has completed its primary function and sent in its notice. Lucien came and stood beside her, not close, just nearby, the way someone stands when they want to be available without being presumptuous about it. Saul's people will want to debrief you tonight, he said. I know. It'll take hours. I know. A pause. You did well, he said. She looked up at him. My father did well. I just showed up for the last scene. That's not... I know it's not entirely true, she said. I'm allowed to understate it for a minute. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. The specific expression of a man who has been holding something careful and serious for a long time and has permitted himself, briefly, to put it down. From the front of this compound came the organized sound of agents working through the building, voices giving and confirming instructions, the structural machinery of a federal operation clicking into its procedural rhythm. Harlan Price's voice somewhere in it, giving his name in the flat, resigned tone of a man beginning the long process of being processed. And somewhere in Chicago, in a federal holding facility, Nolan Pierce was in the third hour of an interview about a woman named Darla Venn and a man named Gerald Spence, and a series of letters he had written over 4 years in the elliptical language of a man who wanted something he was not willing to write down clearly. And the federal agent across from him had just placed a document on the table that contained a name, Ashcroft, in a context that was finally, irrevocably, and completely clear. And the expression on Nolan Pierce's face as he read it was the expression of a man understanding, all at once and far too late, the full dimensions of what he had thrown away and what he had, in its place, allowed in. Serena didn't know that yet. She would know it tomorrow. Tonight she sat in a chair in a compromised compound in Maine, with her father's keys transmitted, and his enemy in handcuffs in the hallway, and the Atlantic somewhere beyond the walls making its old indifferent sound. And she let herself be, for exactly 1 more minute, the woman who had walked out of a courthouse that morning with $1,100 and a suitcase. Then she stood up. Agent Sowal was going to want to start the debrief in 10 minutes, Lucian said. Tell her 9, Serena said, and walked out to meet her. Agent Petra Sowal was not what Serena had pictured. She had pictured someone hard-edged and institutional. the specific variety of federal agent who had traded warmth for competence so long ago that the trade felt natural. What walked through the operations room door was a woman in her late 40s wearing a rain jacket over a tactical vest, dark hair pulled back with the utilitarian efficiency of someone who had stopped caring about appearances sometime around year 3 of building a case that nobody above her believed in. She had a cut above her left eyebrow, fresh, maybe an hour old, that she had not bothered to cover. She moved through the room with the assessing, calibrated attention of someone taking inventory, and when her eyes landed on Serena, they held for a moment with something that was not admiration exactly, but was close to it. The transmission came through clean, Sowal said, without preamble, without introduction. She sat down across from Serena at the workstation table and opened a tablet. Both key sequences, the estate documentation, the Spence correspondence. It's enough, she paused. Combined with what my team has been building for 4 years, it is more than enough. You said you had assets already positioned in the region, Serena said. We've been tracking a soulless logistics operation out of Portsmouth for 6 months. Tonight wasn't coincidence. We were watching the same people who were watching you. When Viscari's contact transmitted your location to our secure channel, we were already 40 minutes out. Sowal looked at the cut on her own hand briefly, as if noticing it for the first time. We came through the north perimeter hard. That's where the static observer was. He didn't go quietly. Is he alive? In custody? Sowal set the tablet down. Harlan Price is in the second vehicle outside. He's been remarkably quiet since we cuffed him, which means he has a lawyer somewhere on a phone right now, which means we have maybe a 6-hour window before the legal machinery starts introducing friction. She looked at Serena directly. I need everything tonight. Your account of every communication, every document, every interaction since this morning. All of it in sequence in your own words. I understand. This debrief will be used in federal proceedings, potentially in front of a grand jury. What you say tonight matters in ways that will still be mattering in 3 years. I understand that too. Sowal looked at her for a moment. The look of someone accustomed to people who said they understood and then, under the actual weight of it, didn't. She appeared to be revising her estimate of Serena in real time. Vescari, she said. Not to Serena. To the room. Lucien came forward from the position he'd held near the wall, present but peripheral, maintaining the deliberate distance of someone who understood that his role in the next several hours was to support rather than lead. The soulless financial structure, Sowal said to him. Your assessment of what the ledger keys unlock, is it consistent with what we have? What you have is the frame, Lucien said. The ledgers are the interior, every transaction, every shell entity, every point of contact with your federal compromises. Named, dated, documented in your father's handwriting, and cross-referenced against third-party records. He paused. Marcus Ashcroft was meticulous to the point of obsession. What you're going to find in those files is the most complete financial criminal record I have ever seen. He spent 10 years building it. Sowal absorbed that. And the federal compromises, how deep? 3 named individuals in DOJ, 2 in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI, 1 federal judge in the Southern District. A pause. The judge is going to be the difficult one. The room was very quiet. Which judge? Sowal said. Lucien told her. Sowal's expression did not collapse. It did something more controlled, a controlled compression, the face of a person absorbing information that reorganizes a significant portion of their professional history. She sat with it for a moment, breathing evenly, and Serena watched her do it with something close to admiration. All right, Sowal said finally. We work around the Southern District. I have contacts in the Second Circuit who are clean. I'd stake my career on it. She paused. I am staking my career on it. She picked up the tablet again. Let's start. They worked through the night. Serena talked and Sowal recorded and occasionally asked questions that were precise and pointed. Not the broad sweeping questions of someone building context, but the surgical questions of someone who already had context and was filling specific gaps. The debrief moved chronologically from the courthouse steps through every exchange with Lucien, every document she had read on the aircraft, every sequence she had extracted from the estate instruments, Every word Harlan Price had said through the operations room door. At 2:40 in the morning, Serena said, "My father told him." Right before they killed him, he told Price that I was the only thing he'd built that was genuinely good. Sowal's hand stopped moving on the tablet. "Price told you that." "He said it to destabilize me. He said my father begged for my safety, and they took the concessions and killed him anyway." Sowal was quiet for a moment. How are you doing with that?" It was the first personal question she had asked in 4 hours. It landed with unexpected weight because of that, the abrupt humanity of it inside the procedural structure of the night. "I'm doing with it what I have to do with it right now," Serena said. "There'll be time for the rest of it later." Sowal nodded once. "Yeah," she said. "That's the way." And they went back to work. At 4:15, one of Sowal's team members came in with coffee and a brief update. The Portsmouth operation had been raided, 12 people in custody, 3 Solis financial accounts frozen by emergency order in the Cayman Islands, executed through an international cooperation treaty that Sowal's team had been preparing for 6 months and had filed the moment the transmission from Maine confirmed sufficient evidentiary basis. "That's fast," Serena said. "We've been ready for 6 months," Sowal said. "We were waiting for the key." She paused. "You were the key." Just before 5 in the morning, Sowal closed the tablet. She looked at Serena across the table with the straightforward, unvarnished expression of someone who had run out of professional register and was speaking person to person. "Your father's case is going to hold," she said. "I can't promise you a timeline, and I can't promise you it'll be clean. Federal prosecutions of this scope are long and ugly, and the defense attorneys for the people we've named tonight are going to be exceptional. But the foundation is solid. What Marcus Ashcroft built is solid." She paused. "He did something remarkable." "He got killed for it," Serena said. "Yes." Sowal didn't flinch from it. "He did." Serena picked up her coffee. It had been cold for an hour and she drank it anyway. "What happens to me now?" "Technically, you're a material witness in a federal investigation. We'll discuss protective protocols, but honestly, with Price in custody and the Portsmouth network dismantled and the financial accounts frozen, the operational capacity to come after you has been significantly reduced." Sowal paused. "Significantly? Not entirely. There are Solis people we haven't identified yet. You'll need to be careful for a while." "I've been careful for 11 years. "You're going to need to be careful differently." Sowal looked at her. "The Ashcroft financial structure that Vescari mentioned, the legitimate international holdings your father built under your name, that's going to require decisions." "I know. There are people who will try to contest the transfer, legal challenges, regulatory complications." "I know. You'll need lawyers, good ones, expensive ones." "I have access," Serena said, and the words felt strange in her mouth. The particular strangeness of a true sentence that belonged to a version of herself she was only just beginning to inhabit. Sowal stood up. She extended her hand across the table and Serena shook it. A firm, direct handshake between two people who had spent a night doing something difficult together. "Get some sleep," Sowal said. "We'll continue in the morning." She left. Serena sat alone in the operations room for a few minutes after that, in the specific silence of a space where something significant has recently concluded. The monitors were still running, camera feeds, now showing federal vehicles and personnel in orderly positions around the compound, the controlled aftermath of a night that had been something else entirely just hours before. She found Lucien outside. He was standing on the stone path that ran along the western side of the compound toward the slope and the water. The sky to the east had the first faint gray of approaching dawn. Not light yet, just the absence of full dark, the sky preparing. He was holding a cup of something and looking at the horizon with the patient, slightly remote expression of a man who was used to waiting for things. She stood beside him. They were quiet for a moment. "The cut on Sowal's eyebrow," Serena said, "from the north perimeter." The static observer wasn't alone. There were 2 of them. He paused. "Sowal took the second one personally. She's been building this case for 4 years and she didn't delegate the breach." "She's that kind of person." "Yes." The water was beginning to be visible below the slope. a gray expanse distinguishing itself from the gray sky, the horizon a clean, dark line between them. She had told him last night that the view didn't matter to her. She had been wrong about that, as she had apparently been wrong about a number of things she had spent years being certain of. "Cordell," she said, "we'll find him. Is he alive?" A pause. "That question has a complicated answer." "Give me the complicated answer." "Cordell has been with me for 11 years. He has a daughter in Providence. 3 years ago, his daughter was involved in an incident that Solis arranged. Not serious, but controlled. A warning. A demonstration of accesses." Lucien's voice was level and without self-pity. "He's been compromised for 2 years, and he never told me because he was trying to protect her and didn't know how to do both." Serena looked at the horizon. "What will happen to him?" "He'll surface when he understands that Solis's operational capacity to threaten his daughter has been reduced. And then we'll have a conversation that will be one of the more difficult conversations I've had in some time." Another pause. "I failed him. I should have known something was wrong, and I missed it because I trusted the 11 years more than I trusted my own read of the last 2. She thought about 11 years, about the specific weight of a long relationship that turns out to have been, in some portion, something other than what you believed it was. "That's a particular kind of loss," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." The sky to the east was beginning to find its first thin color. "You're going to disappear after this," she said. He didn't deny it. "There's a property in Portugal, coastal, small. I've been putting things in order for 3 years. After this, the order is complete. And the promise to my father, fulfilled." He said it simply, without ceremony. The word of a man setting down something he had carried for a long time, with a care that was, itself, a form of respect. "He asked me to protect you until you chose your own destiny. You chose it tonight. In that corridor with Price outside the door and the transmission at 94%, that's when you chose it." She thought about that moment, the progress bar, the hard, steady rhythm of her heartbeat, the cold clarity that had taken up residence in her chest and had not left. "I didn't feel like I was choosing a destiny," she said. "I felt like I was doing the next thing that needed doing." "That's what choosing a destiny feels like," Lucien said. "The cinematic version is a lie. Real decisions feel like problem solving." She almost smiled. "Not quite. Tell me about Lisbon," she said. He looked at her. "You told my father about Lisbon once, for 40 minutes while he worked through something complicated." She looked at the water. "Tell me." A moment of quiet. Then he began to talk, low and unhurried, the particular voice of a man who had described something many times and had never lost his relationship to the original thing. "The light on the Tagus in the late afternoon," he said. "The specific gold of it, the way it moved, the old neighborhoods with their cracked tile, and the sound of the city at evening, the specific smell of the air coming off the river. The way the streets went uphill in every direction, and the whole city seemed to be arranged around the fact that water was at the center of everything." Serena listened. The sky above the Atlantic went through its slow transformation, gray to pearl, to the first thin edge of rose along the horizon line. She watched it happen, and she listened to Lucien's voice describing a city her father had wanted to see and never reached, and she let herself be, for this specific and unrepeatable window of time, exactly where she was. Not the woman who had walked out of a courthouse, not an heiress, not a material federal witness, not her father's instrument or her ex-husband's ex-wife or anyone's protected charge. Just a woman watching the dawn come in over the Atlantic with a cup of cold coffee and the voice of a careful, complicated man describing light on water. When he finished, she said, "I'm going to go there. To Lisbon. After all of this settles, when I have the structures in place and the legal proceedings are underway, and I can put someone competent in charge of the day-to-day." She paused. "I've never been." "Your father would have wanted you to go." I know." A beat. "I'm going because I want to go." He nodded once, the nod of someone making note of a distinction that mattered. 3 weeks later, the first federal indictments were unsealed. Serena read about them on her laptop in a hotel room in Boston, where she had been living while her legal team worked through the preliminary phases of the Ashcroft estate consolidation. 7 names in the first round, mid-level Solis operational figures, the kind of indictments that established the foundation for what would come after. Harlan Price was not among them. Price was, her contact at the DOJ confirmed, cooperating. The specific transactional cooperation of a man who understood that the architecture of what he'd served had collapsed and that his best remaining asset was information. She read the news article twice and closed the laptop. She called her legal team and asked 3 specific questions about the timeline for transferring operational control of the Ashcroft financial holdings. She got 3 specific answers. She made notes. She confirmed a call for the following morning. She did not think about Nolan for most of the day. She thought about him for 11 minutes in the early evening, standing at the hotel room window with a glass of water, looking at the city below. She thought about the courthouse, the smile, the practiced laugh, the 4 years of correspondence he had conducted with a man representing the people who killed her father, the correspondence that his own attorneys were now describing in federal proceedings as a profound failure of judgment by a man who had been manipulated by a romantic partner. Which was true, Serena understood. It was true, and it was also not the whole truth, because Nolan Pierce had always been the kind of man who, when presented with a door that might lead somewhere profitable, opened it without fully committing to caring about what was on the other side. He had opened a door and not looked at where it led. That was not innocence, but it was also not the deliberate conspiracy her initial reading of the correspondence had made her feel. It was something smaller and sadder. A man who had been careless with something he didn't understand the value of, which was, she thought, a description that applied to his entire relationship with her, and not just the letters. She stopped thinking about him at the 11-minute mark. Not as an act of forgiveness, she wasn't there yet, and she was not going to perform arrival at a destination she hadn't reached. She stopped thinking about him because the 11 minutes had told her everything the subject currently had to offer, and she had other things to do. 6 weeks after Maine, Serena walked into the Boston offices of the attorneys managing the Ashcroft estate and sat at the head of a conference table for the first time in her life. 8 people in the room. The lead attorney, a careful woman named Hendricks, who had spent the last 3 weeks learning more about the Ashcroft financial structure than she had known existed 3 weeks ago, opened the meeting with a summary of the consolidated holdings. The number Hendricks presented was larger than Serena had expected, even knowing what Lucien had told her. She kept her face neutral. She asked 5 questions. She received 5 answers. She requested 3 modifications to the proposed management structure and explained her reasoning for each. Hendricks and her colleagues made notes and exchanged looks across the table. The looks of people revising their understanding of who they were dealing with. Serena recognized those looks. She had spent 11 years being on the receiving end of the opposite version. The looks that accompanied the assumption of her inconsequence. The recalibration ran in both directions. "One more thing," she said before the meeting ended. "The name. On all operational documents going forward. Not Ashcroft Holdings, not Pierce." She paused. "Serena Ashcroft, principal. The name on the door is mine, or there's no door." Hendricks looked at her. "That's unusual for an entity of this structure." "I know," Serena said. "Do it anyway." The meeting ended. She took the elevator down alone. On the street outside, Boston was doing what Boston does in December. Cold and gray and indifferent and somehow still functional. People moving through it with their heads down and their collars up. The city proceeding with the particular stubbornness of a place that has seen worse and intends to continue regardless. She walked 2 blocks and found a coffee shop and ordered something hot and sat by the window for 20 minutes watching the street. She thought about her father. She thought about him the way she wanted to be able to think about him. Not the compressed-shouldered figure in the surveillance photograph, not the voice on the phone sounding specifically tired in the spring of 2018, not the man who had embedded his greatest work inside the paperwork of her grief without telling her. She tried to find the earlier version, the man who had filled every room, the particular quality of his attention when she talked, the way he had listened like it was a skill he had practiced, like being heard was something he believed she deserved. She found him. Not completely. Not the way she had been able to find him in the years before she had understood what he'd been carrying, but enough. A recognizable shape, warm at the edges. She finished her coffee. She left. 2 months later, Lucien sent her a postcard. Just a postcard. No note, no message. A photograph of the Tagus River at late afternoon, the specific gold of the light on the water exactly as he had described it in the pre-dawn dark of the main compound. On the back, in handwriting that was smaller and more precise than she would have expected, 2 words: "It's real." She put the postcard on the desk in her new office, a converted loft in Boston's financial district, high ceilings, windows facing east, a city view that she had selected deliberately because she wanted to look at something that was moving. She looked at it sometimes when she was working, not often, just when she needed to remember that the thing he had described had not been constructed for the occasion, that it existed independently somewhere, doing what it did, regardless of whether anyone was watching. 5 months after the main compound, Serena drove to Chicago. She had business there, a meeting with a regional director of one of the Ashcroft investment entities, a preliminary conversation about transitioning a portion of the portfolio toward legitimate infrastructure development, the beginning of the restructuring that would take years and would not be simple and would require her to be, consistently and without apology, exactly who she was. She finished her meetings at 3 in the afternoon. She drove to the courthouse. She parked on the street and sat in the car for a few minutes. Not because she needed to collect herself, she didn't. Because she wanted to give the moment its proper weight before she moved through it. She got out of the car. She walked up the courthouse steps. The same steps she had walked down 8 months ago with a suitcase and $1,100 and the borrowed bones feeling of a woman who didn't know where she was going. She walked up them and through the doors and down the corridor to the lobby, and then she stopped. She didn't have business here today. She had come because she needed to stand in the place where the story had a beginning and confirm that she was no longer in it the same way. That the woman who had stood in this lobby and watched Nolan Pierce not look at her face had not been erased, had not been corrected or improved or resolved into someone better, had simply continued, had walked out a door and gotten on a plane and read 47 pages in the air over the Midwest and extracted her father's work from the paperwork of her grief and stood in a corridor and refused to move backward. Had, in other words, been enough. She stood in the lobby for 3 minutes. Then she walked back out. On the courthouse steps, the November air found her. The same gray, cold November air as 8 months ago, the city indifferent and ongoing around her. She put her hands in her coat pockets and looked at the street. No black aircraft, no armored SUVs, no foreign country code on her phone, and no stranger in a back seat with a folder full of things she hadn't known she was owed. Just the street. Just Serena Ashcroft, standing on courthouse steps in Chicago, with a meeting behind her and a flight home in 2 hours, in a coat that was warmer than the gray one she'd worn last time, and boots that she had bought because she liked them rather than because they were practical, looking at a city that was doing what cities do. Proceeding, indifferent, enormous, full of lives that had nothing to do with her. She breathed in. Cold air, exhaust, the distant smell of rain that was going to arrive later and would not be here yet. She breathed out. She walked down the steps, not as someone's forgotten wife, not as a mafia princess emerging into her inheritance, not as a federal witness or a principal or an instrument her father had spent a decade building to outlast him. As a woman who had learned at considerable cost and considerable delay that the ordinary life she had wanted was never going to be found by making herself small enough to fit inside someone else's version of it. That the only ordinary life available to her was the one she built herself, with her own name on the door. She reached the bottom step. She kept walking. She kept walking until she reached the corner, and then she stopped because the light was red, and Chicago traffic had no interest in her personal narrative. Standing at the crosswalk, she checked her phone. 2 emails from Hendricks about a regulatory filing deadline. A text from the regional director she'd met that afternoon confirming the follow-up call for Thursday. A voicemail from a number she didn't recognize, area code 207, Maine. She listened to the voicemail. It was Rask. Not the tactical, stripped-down Rask of the compound. A different register, still economical, still without anything wasted, but human in a way that the operational context had not permitted. She said her name, said she was calling on a personal matter rather than professional, said she had Serena's contact through Lucien and hoped that was all right, said she'd been thinking about something Serena had said in the corridor of the compound, the part about doing the next thing that needed doing, and that it had stayed with her. Said she didn't really have a specific reason for calling beyond that. Said take care of yourself, and ended the message without ceremony. The light turned green. Serena crossed the street and stood on the other side and called the number back. Rask picked up on the second ring. "It's Serena," she said. "I know." A beat. "I wasn't sure you'd call back." "I almost didn't," Serena said honestly. "I'm standing on a street corner in Chicago, and I have a flight in 2 hours, and I'm not sure what we're supposed to talk about." "Neither am I," Rask said. "That's the honest answer." "Then let's find out." They talked for 22 minutes, longer than either of them had apparently planned, long enough that Serena had to walk faster toward the parking garage to make her timeline work. Rask was in Portland. She had left Lucien's employ formally 3 weeks ago, with what she described as a clean separation and mutual respect, and no hard feelings on either side. She was consulting now, she said. Independent. Still in the security field, but choosing her clients with more deliberate criteria than she had been able to apply previously. "What criteria?" Serena asked. "Whether the work is actually protecting something worth protecting," Rask said. "Sounds simple. Turns out most of the work in this field doesn't pass that test." Serena thought about that. "I may have something to discuss with you. In a few months, when the structure is more settled, the Ashcroft portfolio is going to need security consultation as it transitions." A pause. "That's a significant operation." "It's going to be." Another pause. "Shorter, with something different in it." "I'd be interested in that conversation," Rask said. They ended the call at the entrance to the parking garage. Serena stood for a moment with her phone in her hand, looking at nothing in particular, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The specific, mild warmth of a connection that had no history of damage in it. No 11 years of slow erosion, no performance or management or careful maintenance of a version of herself that someone else required. Just two people who had been through something hard together, finding out if there was a conversation on the other side of it. It was a small thing. She was finding that small things had weight she'd underestimated. She got in the car and drove to the airport. The federal indictments continued through the winter. By February, 23 people with direct Solis Group affiliations had been charged across 4 jurisdictions. The named federal compromises, the 3 DOJ officials, the 2 FBI financial crimes agents, the judge, were handled with the specific, careful procedural delicacy that situations involving institutional actors required. 2 of them resigned before charges were formally filed. The judge contested vigorously, through attorneys who were as good as Lucien had predicted, and the proceedings promised to extend for years. So all called Serena in February with an update that was, by the standards of what had come before, almost mundane. Procedural timelines, evidentiary submissions, the architecture of a prosecution that would grind through its institutional processes with the slow, enormous momentum of a thing that had enough foundation to eventually land. "Price's cooperation has been valuable," Soal said. "More than we anticipated. He's been with Solis for 22 years and he remembers everything." "What does he want in exchange?" "Reduced exposure. He's not going to walk free. He's not asking to. He's asking for a number that reflects cooperation rather than full culpability." A pause. "He's going to get something close to what he's asking for." Serena considered that. The man who had stood outside the operations room door and told her how her father had died. The man who had watched her father beg and had taken the concessions and killed him anyway, getting something close to what he was asking for. "I know how that lands," Soal said. "Do you?" "I've been doing this for 18 years. I know how it lands every time, and I still do it because without cooperation agreements, cases like this take twice as long and end with half the charges." A beat. "It's not justice in the way the word is supposed to feel. It's the version of justice that exists inside the actual system, which is slower and uglier and more compromised than it should be, and still better than the alternative." Serena was quiet for a moment. "My father spent 10 years building a case," she said, "so that it would hold inside the actual system." "Yes," Soal said. "He understood exactly what he was building it for. He was not a naive man." "No," Serena said. "He wasn't." She sat with that for a while after the call ended. The imperfect machinery of it, the compromises and the timelines and the cooperation deals and the defense attorneys who were exceptional and would find every crack in every structure. The long, ugly, uncinematic reality of what accountability actually looked like when it moved through institutions. Her father had known all of that and had built the case anyway, had trusted that sufficient foundation was enough, that the machinery, for all its imperfection, was still capable of moving things that needed to be moved if you gave it something solid enough to work with. She found that somehow more remarkable than if he had believed in a cleaner version of justice. He had believed in the actual version and had spent a decade serving it anyway. She added that to the shape of him she was reconstructing. It made the shape more complete. In March, Nolan Pierce pled guilty to a single count of financial negligence in connection with the Darla Venn investigation. His attorneys had negotiated the specific, careful language of a man who had not known the full nature of what he was involved in, which was substantially true, and who had exercised reckless disregard for the consequences of his correspondence with Gerald Spence, which was entirely true. He received a suspended sentence, a substantial fine, and the requirement to cooperate fully with ongoing federal proceedings. Pierce Capital was dissolved. The Aspen property was liquidated as part of the financial penalties. Darla Venn received 6 years. Serena learned about the plea from a news alert on her phone and read the article once and put the phone face down on her desk and went back to the document she had been reviewing. She sat with it for approximately 30 seconds. The specific, complicated texture of the information, the fact of it, the way it closed something that had been open. And then she continued with the document. She was not glad. She was also not sorry. She was something more honest and harder to name, the feeling of a thing having reached its logical end, neither satisfying nor unsatisfying, simply complete. She never heard from Nolan directly. No call, no letter, no message through attorneys. She had not expected one. Whatever accounting he was doing of his own arrogance and its costs, he was doing it in a private space that did not include her, which was, she thought, probably the right instinct. There was nothing she needed from him at this stage. No confrontation, no apology would alter the math of what had happened. He had been what he was, and what he was had led him where it led him, and she had been in the path of that trajectory and had survived it and was now doing other things. That was enough. In April, she went to Lisbon. She had planned 3 days. She stayed for 9. The city was exactly what Lucian had described and also completely different, because descriptions are not things, and things insist on being themselves without asking permission. She walked the old neighborhoods in the early morning when the light was still flat and the streets were quiet, and the tile work on the building facades caught what light there was and held it. She found the river, the Tagus, wide and the color of hammered silver in the morning, and she walked along it for 2 hours on the first day and found a cafe where the coffee was excellent and the pastries were architecture, and she sat for an hour with nothing to do except be in a city she had never been in. She thought about her father wanting to come here. She thought about the postcard on her desk. She thought about a man in Portugal, in a small coastal property, who had spent 20 years building something and 5 years carefully dismantling it, and was now, presumably, doing what people do when they have set down the weight of a long obligation, figuring out who they are in the absence of it. She did not contact him. She had thought about it and decided that the decision he had made to disappear was one she was going to respect. He had kept his promise. He had fulfilled the obligation. What he was now was his own, and the cleanest thing she could offer him in return for 8 years of watching from a careful distance was to let that be true without complicating it. But she did something else. On the 4th day, she found a stationery shop in the Alfama district, small, cramped, run by a man in his 70s who clearly regarded browsers with tolerant suspicion, and she bought a postcard. A photograph of the Tagus at late afternoon, the specific gold of the light on the water. She wrote 2 words on the back. I see it. She addressed it to a property in the Alentejo region of Portugal, a coastal town, a specific street. The address that had appeared in Lucien's organizational files, and that she had no legitimate reason to have memorized, except that she had, because she was her father's daughter, and her father had been meticulous to the point of obsession. She walked to a post office and mailed it. She did not know if he was at that address. She did not know if he would receive it. She did not know if it would mean to him what she intended it to mean, which was simply, the thing you described is real, and I went to see it, and I am well, and so are you. I hope. That was all. On the last morning, she woke early and walked to the river before the city was fully awake. The light was not yet the late afternoon gold of Lucian's description. It was the early light, different, pale, and new, coming at the water from a low angle and making it look less like hammered silver and more like something breathing. She stood at the river's edge and watched it for a long time. She thought about the woman who had stood on courthouse steps 8 months ago with a suitcase and $1,100. She thought about her with something close to tenderness. The specific tenderness of a person looking at an earlier version of themselves who had been carrying something heavy and had not yet put it down. Who had wanted so badly for a particular kind of ordinary life that she had bent herself into a shape it required and had held that shape long past the point of comfort, past the point of recognition, until the shape was all that remained. Who had walked out of a courthouse on a gray November morning and had no idea that the day was going to become the first day of a different story. She had not been a fool. She had not been weak. She had been a person who loved something and had held on past the point where holding on was wise, and that was a very ordinary human thing to do. And it had cost her a specific and real price, and she had paid it, and she was here. Lisbon. The Tagus. Early light on the water. 9 days in a city her father had wanted to see. She would go back to Boston tomorrow. She would go back to the meetings and the legal filings and the restructuring and the long, unglamorous work of turning something her father had built in secrecy and fear into something that could operate in daylight. She would make decisions she wasn't entirely certain about, and she would get some of them wrong, and she would correct course and keep going because that was what the work required, and she was capable of the work. She knew that now in a way she hadn't 8 months ago. Not because anything had been proven to her from the outside, because she had stood in a corridor with her hand on a laptop and a transmission at 94%, and a man outside the door who wanted to reduce her to a variable, and she had stayed exactly where she was. The river moved below her, wide and indifferent and continuous, doing what it had done for centuries before she arrived, and would do for centuries after she left, entirely unconcerned with the specific human standing at its edge at 6 a.m. trying to locate herself in the world. She located herself. Here. This river. This city. This coat. These boots she had bought because she liked them. Serena Ashcroft. Principal. Name on the door. Her father's daughter in the city he never reached, watching his river in the morning light. She breathed in. The air was cold and smelled of water and the distant begin of the day. She breathed out. She turned from the river and walked back into the city.